changes in Keir Starmer's approval ratings. Welcome to Rick's Europe, Ben Cope, communicator, writer and political commentator with Young Voices UK.
Hi there.
So Keir Starmer's approval rating is said to have dropped. Could you tell us more about these numbers?
Sure, yeah. I think there's sort of two key elements to this. I think firstly that Keir Starmer started off from a much lower base than most new prime ministers have done. I think that reflects probably a lack of enthusiasm for his premiership when he came into office, and that most people were probably voting against the previous Conservative government rather than necessarily for the new Labour government. But then even from that relatively low starting point, he has dropped over his first 2 months in office. So and really to unusual levels for a prime minister who would hope to expect some kind of honeymoon period at the beginning. So, while I don't think this is necessarily a problem for him right now, he's just won his election. He'll have 5 years to hopefully deliver something for the public. I think it's concerning for him that if this does continue, that will be a real problem for him throughout his tenure.
As you said, he hasn't been the sitting prime minister very long at all. What are the main causes for this drop, do you believe?
I think it probably is this cronyism or corruption scandal that certainly in the UK, we've been talking a lot over the last sort of month, really. And essentially, sort of to break that down, is that as Keir Starmer has tried to set up his government, so both he's been electing ministers in his cabinet, but he's also been selecting advisors rather, and I think that in the UK there's sort of two sides to this. One is where you have advisors which are sort of political appointees, they're political positions. Then we also have kind of an impartial civil service or Whitehall. And the contentious issue here is that Starmer has been sort of pushing allies and appointing allies into the supposedly impartial civil service. So we've had a lot of people who've been aide to the Labour Party before. There was one person who even a former banker who actually had donated £20,000 to the Labour Party, who was briefly parachuted into a position, but they after the backlash they've since reversed on that. So I think there's accusations of corruption, and I think the real damage that this does for Labour is that he essentially won the election because people were tired of the Conservatives. Labour ran on a manifesto. It was literally just called Change. It was about sort of, we will be different to this other party. But I think that many in the public are starting to think, well, maybe they're not so different, and I think that will be a problem for his government, and something he'll have to look to address quickly.
And as you mentioned, change has been promised, and of course there were tragic events that led up to riots around the UK, and his addressing the nation. I understand that there's been a lot of controversy around that. Is this a contributing factor as well to these numbers? And can you tell us a bit about how he addressed the nation and the reactions of it?
Sure. Firstly, I'll give a quick background to the story. So there was a horrific crime committed in the UK, and there was a lot of misinformation spread online about sort of who the perpetrator was, and with some people saying that it was an immigrant, and that sort of sparked a lot of riots throughout the UK, particularly in more deprived areas. And then there was a very strong police response where they sort of tried to crack down, and then subsequently a strong judicial response as well. So a lot of the people who've been arrested have been given sort of long prison sentences, and there have been sort of accusations, at least from certain elements of the right in the UK, that sort of these seem disproportionate compared to some other sentence or sort of relatively lenient sentences that have been given to others. I mean, my personal view is that I don't think this has actually hugely affected his ratings. I think most people were quite disappointed with the riots, and I think they saw that it was a sort of a large element of it was a far right kind of movement, and I think the strong response that Starmer led there, I think was people welcomes that. So I do think most of it is most of the reason for his decline in approval ratings has been this corruption scandal, and then also I think people are just going to be quite impatient with Starmer to deliver anything very quickly.
And there's been a lot of talk of two-tier policing and mainstream media not really showing both sides of the riots. You have the people who, are breaking into shops and violent, and then you have the people who are just genuinely displeased and unhappy, but don't want to be associated with this. And is there still a feeling that some people are feel that Keir Starmer doesn't acknowledge that side of the argument?
I think there are some, although I would say it's probably restricted to a sort of relatively small part of the UK population. I probably, if I was going to put a number on this, I'd say maybe around 15% of the voter base. And I think, so, there are those concerns. However, I think sort of most people did probably welcome sort of the relatively tough response. And I think a lot of the the pushbacks that people would provide to those who had who claimed they were sort of protesting or had legitimate concerns in those riots is that it was the wrong forum for that, because one, you had sort of the riots and unacceptable forms of protest, and then also the reason for it, the trigger for it, was essentially racist sort of misinformation about who the perpetrator of this crime was. So by all means, there are sort of legitimate concerns you can have about immigration or whatever it might be, but the trigger of it was proved to be wrong. So I think that's probably the reason why I don't think it's I think it's probably restrained to that sort of 15% rather than a sort of mass concern.
So his approach to the migration question, this is not part of the rating, the numbers or the results of his approval ratings?
I don't think so, and I think this is quite an interesting thing in the UK, whereby there's been a real bifurcation between the priorities of Conservative and Reform voters and Labour voters. So previously, sort of how important immigration to you has, it's been roughly the same amount for both parties, and sometimes there'll be a sort of an influx of migration, then generally it becomes a bigger concern, and then maybe it drops down again to another point. But over the last sort of 9 months or so, there's been a real divide whereby it's become the most important issue for Conservative and Reform voters, or sometimes tied with the economy, but it's always right up there. But it's dropped way back down with Labour voters, and who I think it's ranking about 5th now. So I think because of this big divide, yes, Starmer, obviously he wants to be popular with everyone, but primarily he'll be concerned with keeping those voters who he thinks will maybe vote for him next time. So I think that's probably why it's not it's not something that it's sort of a top concern for him right now.
Could you tell us more about this project to release prisoners to make room for other prisoners, the rioters, for instance?
Of course, yes, it's a very controversial issue in the UK, where essentially our prisons are full right now. Definitely the male prisons, and the reason why that's happened is because throughout the last Conservative government, the sentences that people were given for crimes became much longer. So we had sentencing inflation, people staying for longer in prison, but we didn't build any more prisons, so the capacity is the same. So we've gradually sort of pushed up against that maximum point, and it's reached crisis point now. And so one of Keir Starmer's sort of first responses to that was, or his sort of great idea to solve that, is to essentially let people out early. So once they reach, I think it's sort of 90 days now that they have left in their sentence, they'll be let out. And I think there's a plan to gradually make that time, the amount of time that would be let out, even earlier and earlier. And understandably, that's a really controversial issue. We had the head of probation in the UK only this week saying that isn't a safe thing to do. If you're rushing offenders to sort of integrate back into society, there will be some times where you fail, and the public are at risk because of that. So, I mean, personally, at least, I think that if you've decided that someone should be in prison, then if you don't have enough space, you need to build more prisons rather than necessarily let people out early. So, yeah, I think that's probably the majority opinion in the UK. So, yes, I think that's that probably is another reason why his approval ratings have suffered as well.
Yeah, you mentioned controversy in the description. What are the reaction of people with this suggestion?
Yeah, I think it's people feel unsafe. I think also, as you talked about earlier with accusations of sort of quote unquote two-tier policing, some people are concerned that some people are being given, or essentially the rioters that we saw have been given very, very long sentences, whereas some others are being let out, early, sort of, who arguably committed sort of more serious crimes. So I think there's a sense of injustice among some, that some people are being given sort of way too long sentences, where others, sort of more serious criminals, are being let out.
How is this playing out? Are there more demonstrations planned? Are the public speaking up against this?
It's very typical in Britain, where whenever news is announced, we get very we get very angry about it for a short period of time, and then generally we forget about it with the next day's news cycle. So I think there are, I at least I've been aware of sort of some minor protests, but I think unfortunately it does just seem that this issue is going to roll on, and I imagine that the next time we'll hear about it is unfortunately when someone who's been let out early, commits another crime. And I think that probably will be the moment when we have to sort of really review this properly, and whether it is safe.
Thank you very much, Ben Cope, communicator, writer and political commentator with Young Voices UK.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Rick's Europe.